Welcome, everyone. I hope you are having a fabulous day, and I have an amazing guest for you today. I have Chris Munro with the Executive Director of Growth Coaching International, and let me tell you, I am floored and honored that he has chosen to spend his morning with us. So thank you, Chris, so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alyssa. It's an absolute joy to be here. As I said earlier, I never miss the opportunity to talk about coaching and education. So this is a pleasure for me, not an honor. Yeah. Thank you.
It gets really exciting, and every time that I watch one of your videos and I watch one of your colleagues' videos, truly you are an inspiration, and everything that you say is just, it's gold to me. So I am thrilled that you are here, and I'm pretty sure my audience, they might notice a little different accent. So Chris,
Yeah.
do you mind telling everyone where you're from and just kind of your journey through?
But I'll try and, yes, briefly. So whenever anyone says, where are you from? There's a complex answer coming from me because I live in Melbourne, Australia. Our organisation, GCI, is based in Sydney, Australia. And this is not an Australian accent. This is a modified Scottish accent. So I'm from Glasgow originally. And I lived and taught in schools up in the northeast of Scotland for 18 years, up in Aberdeen. Actually, Texans will probably know of Aberdeen from its oil business up there. So there's a lot of people from your neck of the woods living and working up and around and vice versa up there. So yeah, I started teaching in 1992. So it's now getting a fair bit over 30 years since I started as a secondary design technology teacher. So high school teacher. And I'll freely admit I could not teach the little ones for all the money in the world. You could not pay me enough to do that. I'm full of admiration for that. And then at one point I spent 5 years in initial teacher education. So I worked at the University of Aberdeen, basically teaching teachers. So adult learning has been my thing for quite a while. And then 13 years ago, decided my wife and I, my daughter, moved to Australia. And I went back into a teaching position in a school here in Melbourne, which was similar to an instructional coach kind of role, professional learning leader, kind of in-house professional developer. It's called a leading teacher, professional learning. And then was running professional learning and coaching projects in another school in Melbourne. And then got the opportunity to come and work for Growth Coaching International as a consultant. And now I get the joy of being executive director and running our operations globally, not running it single-handedly, with a very, very capable and talented team of lovely people around the world. And our partners in North America, Gym Night and Instructional Coaching Group, we have a formal partnership there too. So the work is properly global. And then when people like yourself come across our videos and resources and things, it's a joy that those geographic boundaries are just disappearing when we can have conversations like this. So yeah, that's a long story short. Yeah.
Beautiful story. And I love your journey. I mean, just talking, you started in 1992, and obviously the world of instructional coaching or professional learning has changed so fast.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about some of the big significant changes that you have seen and how growth coaching supports those changes.
It's a good question. When you have two coaches talking to each other, there's always good questions, aren't there? So yeah, of course, that's a good question. Do you know, I often reflect on that journey and particularly as a high school teacher. You come into teaching, and I came into teaching because of my subject passion, because of that was the thing I was good at school, that was the thing I had a passion for. I studied at university and thought, it'd be lovely to teach this, and I was in technology, so it's a rapidly changing, and still is, it's STEM and STEAM and science and technology, and a lot of work over the early years of women into science and engineering as well, and female students coming through into those fields. And that was exciting. But I look back now and we're still having the same discussions and debates now, and that was literally 30 years ago. So it's a little bit depressing sometimes. But in terms of professional learning, I think when I think back to the conversations I had with my peers and the conversations I had with my team members when I was an unpromoted teacher and then when I was in a position of responsibility, those conversations were often about curriculum. They were about procedural, administrative things, and we weren't talking an awful lot about instructional practice. And now I teach people about instructional playbooks. I deliver the impact cycle training and so on here in Australia. And I'll often say, look, if you ask me to write down my instructional playbook, my core instructional practices from the early days of my teaching career, it wouldn't be a book. I can tell you that much. It wouldn't be a book. It might be an A5 pamphlet, a little leaflet thing, because we just didn't have those kinds of conversations. And I think over my career, what I look back on now is I've got, and what I still build on, is a depth of conversational and relational experience in a whole range of conversational contexts. And a lot of the time, those conversations were about learning, or they were about the adult who was in the conversations learning, not just the children's learning. And I probably, without realizing it, developed a real interest and passion for the people development side of the work and of the role of being an educator. Knowing the complexity of that firsthand, that's never changed. That's reassuring and depressing, depending on how you look at it. But the complexity is still as complex. Of course, it is. But I think you're right. Coaching and education was not on the landscape then. And even 13 years ago, Jim Knight and others were doing groundbreaking research, Joyce and Showers, all sorts of others before, and others looking at things on professional learning and pinpointing this difference that coaching could make. And at that time, when I was still teaching and in teacher education in the north of Scotland, the words coaching would still have conjured up images of sports coaching. It was not in the educational landscape at that time. It was just emerging. So as a field of coaching and education worldwide, we're still relatively young and as a field, even though there's now, pushing on 25 years of research around on instructional coaching. Our work in GCI emerged from a kind of corporate executive coaching, leadership coaching space, and then transferring that and applying it in education contexts. Our partners, ICG, Instructional Coaching Group, and Jim Knight's work and so on, and others, lots of others working in that space, came from a teacher professional learning, impact on practice. How do we get more high impact strategies being implemented and so on? And what's lovely over the years is there's kind of a Venn diagram that Jim and I talk about, that our work has met in the middle in this space of what does it mean to be a coach? And what are the core skills and techniques and knowledge and practices that you expect? And it all boils down to that relational piece, doesn't it? And how you interact with fellow professionals. And I look back now and think there were lots of conversations that I look back on that were coach-like at different stages in my career. I was sometimes having to do performance conversations with student teachers, trainee teachers who weren't quite getting there. And I had to be the one that held up the mirror to them and say, look, how's this going? We had to look at standards, all those things. The good ones were probably more coach-like. It was a coaching approach. The ones that I would like to replay and do differently were probably a good bit too much of me in the conversation, if I'm honest. And I think that experience has shaped what I do now. The challenge is when you train people to be more like this and operate in these ways, either in formal coaching roles or a coaching approach in different roles, you can't pour your wisdom and your years of conversational experience into them. You know that. You do that similar work, you've got to help them do the sense making and find that. So that's the joy of what we do, isn't it? That we help people have that thinking space where they make sense of their environment, they make sense of the complexity of the work and the people. The human nature of our work is both the joy and the curse some days of what we do. You work with humans. I often have to say that to groups that, sorry, just wishing for them to see the world your way is probably not going to work out for you. Manipulation's not going to work out for you either. We're humans with identity and we're complex, and that's the joy of the work of education and adult learning as well. So that's a long-winded, rambly answer, isn't it? But I think that's, as I look at where I am now and what I do and the kind of work you and I are both involved in, I can see the roots of that in my background and in my experience in schools. Even though I wasn't doing coaching, I wasn't labeled as a coach until relatively recently, but 9-10 years ago in Australia. But I was probably, my better conversations were probably more coach-like.
Yeah.
And even the mentoring conversations I had with beginning teachers, I had lots of student teachers in my school. I had new graduates who'd come out. I loved supporting that work. I did some work out at the district level, supporting across primary and secondary schools, and loved that kind of developmental work. But I was doing it purely based on my own experience. I didn't have any qualifications or training in how to be an effective conversational leader. And that's full circle. That's right where I am now. That's the passion project now in the area of interest. That's now what I get to do for a living, which is lovely. Yeah.
You said
There's a lot.
that I've just loved. And, you know, taking it back to you mentioning some of those better conversations were very coach-like. And how many times I look back at some of my previous conversations and I cringe because it was more of me doing the talking, and it was, well, when I did this or when I taught, you know, and when we're working with adults, we're working with egos, and not in a bad, like, I don't say that in a bad way, but we have to navigate that. And you making those comments about being a conversational leader, that is just, even that phrase is so powerful, because I do see a lot of people shut down during coaching, or they have a very nasty idea of what coaching is because it was directive for so long.
Yeah.
And so if you were to thinking of a conversational leader, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see us making, and where do we start making adjustments?
Do you know, yeah, mistakes is a heavy word. And we're coaches, so I'll notice language. That's okay. No, it's not judgment in that at all. I've just got to say, trust me, there's no judgment in that. You don't know me, but honestly, there's no judgment in that. It's always funny when you get two coaches together. But you know, there are tensions. I'll paraphrase from my lovely colleague Christian van Nieuwburg. So Christian's an absolute world expert in this stuff, and he talks about tensions. He's got a lovely book called Advanced Coaching Practice. And I remember him telling the story about when he and David Love were writing that book. They sat down to write that book. They thought initially, I hope I get this right if Christian listens to this, but they thought it would just be fancier, more advanced coaching techniques and tools and things. And I get that. But what they ended up writing about were, when you're at an advanced level or you're really in that space of being a coach, you're navigating tensions. You're actually skillfully navigating. And one of the tensions is the one you just flagged there for me, was my voice versus your voice. So there's a tension of, how much do I feel I want to contribute here? If I contribute in this way, what does that do to the dynamic? And yes, ego, status, identity, who's doing the thinking? If I'm doing most of the talking, it probably means I'm doing most of the thinking. But the tensions arise because we've all got this in us as well. We have an identity too. We have professional experience, and our default way of helping, and I'm channeling some of Edgar Schein's work here, our default way of helping, and he would say in Western culture actually, is to tell them what we think. When we see someone stuck or see someone apparently needing our help, the helpful thing to do is to give them advice. Helpful advice giving is just the biggest thing. So if you want a mistake, that's often the biggest mistake, is we jump to helpful advice giving too soon. We've all done it with our nearest and dearest. We've all done it with the people closest to us, where they're sharing a story and they just really need you to listen and empathize and say, gee, that's tough. That must be really frustrating for you. And you start with, have you thought of, I wonder if you start asking questions that aren't really questions, what Michael Bungay Stanier calls offering up a suggestion with a question mark attached. Alyssa, I'm wondering if you've thought of a time when, I wonder if you think you could you, do you think you could do this? And actually all I'm saying to you is, Alyssa, I think you should do this, but I'm trying to hide it. And so why can't we just sit and hold that space for someone for just a bit longer to let them do their best thinking, to let them, and that takes a real faith in, it takes a faith in two things. It takes faith in the process that actually by holding that space, they will get there. But it also takes a faith in that person's capacity to be different and think differently and see things differently. And if they don't, and if they can't, there are blind spots, then and only then, still with great caution, you share some, notice all the provisional language I use when I talk about this, you unleash, there's a violent word, you unleash just a little bit of your knowledge or your perspective. Sometimes what they might need from you isn't the stuff you know, and we place great value on that. Your sense of worth and value as an instructional coach, I would propose, is so inextricably linked to what you know. You usually get to become an instructional coach or a mentor or a new principal mentor or any of these kind of roles because you've been there, done it, and got the t-shirt. You're recognized as an expert. You know stuff. You're good at it. So because you have that, you've kind of got that status. You're one of the anointed ones. You know, and so you tend to have that sense of value based on what you know and what you can give that person. And you don't see one of those valuable things as, I'm giving them space to think. I'm giving them time. I'm giving them my undivided attention. Nobody's ever done that for them before. And there's often a shift that's as valuable and actually sometimes more powerful than the stuff that you know that they might need, you know? And so I think that's the biggest mistake, definitely in all of us as humans, just as humans, not even as coaches, as helpers. We overplay our own knowledge and expertise, and we go there far, far, far too soon. So I would never say thou shalt not. You know, the mantra sometimes don't ask, don't tell is helpful when you're learning to coach, because it makes you really set aside that knowledge and expertise, put it in a box and keep it there for a bit longer. But saying you never share anything is actually an unhelpful thing to say in an education context, especially in instructional coaching, because I expect you to know some things about instruction. And I'm probably sitting there saying to you, Alyssa, I don't know. What do you think? And you're going, oh, if you're a skilled coach, you'll say, well, we might get to what I know, and I've got some ideas that we might look at together. But let's sit with your context. It's your class. It's your kids. You're the expert in that world. I'm not going to be standing in front of them doing it. You are. So let's hold that space for a bit longer. And if I need to sprinkle in some of my know-how, I will. But I'll do it dialogically with you, and we'll both make sense of it together so that you're set up to go forward. That takes a lot of you managing those tensions of your own voice and managing yourself and noticing them. That's why it's tiring work, isn't it?
Yeah.
But most of us, without that awareness, go straight to, oh, I'll show you, I'll tell you, have you thought of, here's an idea. And what you do is create that status difference and power difference between you and them inadvertently. And they sometimes give you that as well. You know, they refer that power to you because you're the coach, you've got the badge, you've got the name, you're from the district, therefore you must know more than me. And they put you up there on the pedestal, and you're trying to create this equality, but you actually amplify that difference if you just go straight to advice giving. So I think that's the number one. And I suppose the flip side of that is, so, and if I'm being solution focused, if we want to do less of that, the solution focused provocation to everyone would be, what would you be doing more of? You know, if you tell me all the mistakes you make as a coach, I would be reframing that in a solution-focused way and saying, so if you're not doing that anymore, if you're not interrupting with all this helpful advice, what would you be doing more of? What would I notice more of in the conversation? And you might say to me, well, there'll be less of my voice. Okay, so what will there be more of as a result of that? That's a less of. Oh, there'll be more of their voice. Okay, so we'll notice that. And what will that sound like? What will they be? What will their voice be? You might say there'll be more silence. It's a thing. There'll be more silence. not more talking. There might be more focused or probing questions from you because you're giving yourself that space to set aside. You might say there'll be more discernment from you. You're discerning when it needs a bit of you and not a bit of you, and you'll be doing this. You'll be shifting stance. One of those things that I like to talk about. So I think there's a lot in there, but if I think the number one, and we see this every time we do training, is people fighting what Michael Bungay-Stanier calls the advice monster. That we've all got that advice monster on our shoulder, whispering in our ear, saying, "I know what Alyssa needs. I know what she needs. Just tell her. She just stop talking. You'll be able to tell her." And it's so ingrained in us that we need to actually acknowledge it. We need to learn how to manage it, and we don't always do it. We don't get it right all the time, and it's okay for coaches to be imperfect, and it's okay for us to get it wrong sometimes. But if you're going in there not trying to be the expert, if you're going in there trying to be someone who has some useful expertise that you might need to share at some stage, with that mindset, there's not a lot you can do wrong that you would call a big mistake, that will damage the relationship. If you're getting in there thinking you know best and you're going in to fix this teacher, and I know that's sometimes the way the district deploys you or positions you as the fixer, or the fidelity police is the other horrible phrase I've heard a few times, compliance officers. If you're going in there with that attitude, then I think you will make mistakes and damage the relationship. But if you get in with a positive attitude and faith in that person, and you're in their corner genuinely, I actually don't think there's any really horrific mistakes you can make. You'll just notice sometimes there's a bit too much of you, or they're not doing enough thinking. And the key is noticing it. Yeah. I'm giving you huge, long, rambling answers here, Alyssa. You're getting the fire.
I hope that any leader is grabbing this nugget, because it also, I'm sitting here thinking of the conversation between a coach and a teacher, an administrator and a teacher. Mm-hmm. And you can give directives. I do hear quite a bit like, well, we need to get the directives because we have to move forward and we need to do this. But my response to that is, you're actually stalling progress, because people will be more resistant. And when we take the time to provide the space for the teacher to think, or anyone just to think, we're actually creating a culture of more problem solvers. I think I feel like my end goal is for people to be independent of me, and they feel confident and flourish. And so what I am taking away from you is really pause more and ensure that I'm not being the advice monster.
Yeah. There's a couple of lovely mantras that I have in my head, and they're borrowed from other people. And one of them is Michael Bungay-Stanier's. My advice is not as good as I think it is. It's a lovely one. His coaching habit book has loads of lovely mantras like that. My advice is not as good as you should have it stuck there above your desk, behind them, wherever they're sitting, put it in the wall behind them, my advice. And there's a lovely one. I think it's Nancy Klein. I keep meaning to go and check because I've cited this a few times recently. And she's wrote a lovely book called Time to Think. That's quite old now, but a real seminal text. And I think it was her that said, is what I'm about to say more important than what they're about to think? Oh, that's so powerful. Is what I'm about to say right now more important than what they're about to think? That actually, just by zipping it for just a little bit longer, if they're quiet, they're thinking. It's not because they've gone to sleep or they're thinking about what they're having for their dinner or their shopping or their next class. It's because you've asked them something that's got them right in that space. And at that point in time, the worst thing you can do is interrupt that thinking. So give them that time and space. And back to what you said about leaders, I get that. And of course, there's an improvement agenda. Of course, there's a need for accountability. Sometimes coaching is perceived by people who don't get it, who don't have the depth of understanding that we have, as a whole load of educators picking their own adventure and just the school of bright ideas. And it's not that. That would be unethical. And actually, you can't run a school like that either. You and I sit and say to each other, I don't know, Alyssa, what do you think? And you say to me, I don't know, Chris, what do you think? And we invent some off the cuff strategy, and we think, let's go and try that with the kids. It's extreme. That could be dangerous. It could be unethical. And actually, there's a curriculum. There are agreements about what we do around here as a school. You never have that. And you might have some teachers who think they operate like that, but you can't run a school like that. So we're never saying, and I do a lot of work with leaders and administrators, this is not pick your own adventure. Sometimes people think of life coaching, where it's just you and your world, and that's fine. I can let you choose to do whatever you like because you're not part of a system. It's very rare to have that level of autonomy, but you've got enough degrees of autonomy as a teacher, enough degrees of freedom, that my job is to help you find them. And my job as a leader is to help you see that you have agency. You can act on certain things in your environment, that you're not just a trained monkey who's just going to jump through hoops and do this robotically. As much as some administrators might think that's the answer, I don't think that's a sustainable solution. And I don't think that's the way we want to treat teachers. I'll nail my colours firmly to the mast. That is not how I would want to be treated as a professional educator.
Mm-mm.
And I go right back to Jim Knight's work again, that and some of the stuff he talks about from Thomas Davenport, that teachers are quintessential knowledge workers. They think for a living. And as soon as you do the thinking for them, they feel deprofessionalized. And what you get is passive compliance. You get people leaving. And we've got enough of that, thank you very much, right now. We want to be keeping teachers. Or you get resistance. You get pushback. And you would do the same. So going really well, good instructional coaching and coaching approaches to leadership actually professionalize people. They give them a space to do the thinking. They don't tell them what to do, but they do that within a form. They do that. There's always a form and a structure around this and an agenda. So we're never saying every conversation is a coaching conversation. Sometimes people need clear, direct, unambiguous information.
Yeah.
But lots of the time, there's an opportunity to support that other person's thinking. And the best way to do that is not to tell them what to do. It's to actually invite them into that thinking space, But this is a real tension that there's that word again, because the narrative worldwide, and I'm able to say that worldwide, is around improvement. The whole narrative around teachers aren't good enough. We've got retention issues. And actually the irony is the answer to part of that retention thing is actually treat teachers like professionals and value them and invest in them. But it's the same frustrating argument the world over, that we're in a hurry to raise attainment, raise outcomes for the kids, and actually the very blunt tool that's used in the name of that is to have more control and more direction, and to deploy coaches as compliance officers, the fidelity police, whatever you want to call it. And in some quarters, it looks like teaching for dummies to me.
Mm-hmm.
I know I wouldn't want to be part of a profession that was being treated like that. It denies and undervalues the huge complexity of the work of teaching and learning.
Yeah.
And so our proposition is that a contemporary way of leading in those kinds of complex environments is a more conversational way of leading, and it's coaching as a way of leading. That it's even in those micro interactions, those interactions in the corridor, at the water cooler, in the school grounds, at the school gate, with parents, bringing your coaching skills and dispositions to those little interactions have similar outcomes to what you see when you do formal coaching with someone, where they feel empowered and they feel that they've got a voice and so on. You can do that in a 3-minute conversation in the corridor. It's harder, takes a lot more discernment and intentionality, but we're seeing that emerge as a model for how a leader operates in all those conversational contexts around the school.
So dive into that a little deeper. How would that look? Like, could you give me an example of that?
So John Campbell, my mentor and our founding director, and I are writing a book about this just now. We're very hopeful that it will be published this year. It's now at editorial stage, so fingers crossed. And that whole book is about, the working title is Growth Talk. Not capitalized growth like the growth framework, but growth talk. And our strapline just now that we're working with is brief conversations, big impact. So you and others who are, and even administrators who work with instructional coaches or mentors or more facilitative coaches, there's a formality around that. We're going to do X number of sessions. We talk about coaching cycles. We know that you're a coach. You've got the name, the title, the badge. And so there's a formality to that engagement. So I have that I do new principal coaching. I work with executives and so on. And they engage me for so many sessions that are an hour long, and it's properly contracted. So we know what that does for people. We know that helps them think. We know that it helps them make progress. We know that it helps them feel more empowered. They have agency, all that stuff. How do we extract the essence of what happens in formal coaching and apply that to conversational contexts that are not formal coaching scenarios? So what I'm not talking about here is leader as coach. When you say leader as coach, it's like saying your school administrator, your school principal, or a head of a curriculum area in a high school setting, for example, like me in design technology before, that I could be the coach of my team members. Now I can, but it won't be the same as what you do, because there's already a line management and a status difference there already. I'm their boss technically in the school. So there's always going to be that tension. That can work, it can be better, but it will never be the same as the formal coaching cycles they do with a designated coach or mentor. Yeah. So an example that we look at a way of mapping this out, that you could bring a coaching approach to your review and development conversations. So just about every school everywhere in the world, and some systems are different, there's an expectation that you go through a kind of a review and goal setting conversation each year. And it tends to be leaders who have to run those conversations with their direct reports, their team members. And typically it tends to be, okay, you're my line manager, Alyssa. You have to chase me for it first, because nobody ever really wants to sit and commit the time to do that. There's a form to be filled in. And even the way you're nodding and wryly grinning, you know what this feels like. It's torture. You go, another thing I've got to do. And it's all about public compliance and accountability. We'll just sign the form and tick the box to say we've had a review conversation. And in the worst case scenario, you tell me what you think of how I've gone this year, and you literally give me a summative report, a grade. Yeah, it's like doing summative reporting with the kids and never doing any formative assessment. You only get the bad news at the end of the year. You never knew up to then. We often treat teachers like that in that kind of system. So a coaching approach to that would be, there would be a lot more of that teacher's voice in that conversation, a lot less of yours. And then you say, well, how do you do that? Because there's still a process, it's still formal. Well, the kinds of questions you ask to lead that conversation, the kinds of prompts you give the person to reflect on before they come to that conversation, the kind of pro formas you use, documentation you use. When we see schools taking a coaching approach to those, they've shifted on those things. It's not tick box, it's reflective questions. And they've worked with the leaders of those conversations to teach them some coaching skills. They're not saying this is going to be coaching, because there is still a role for their voice, because they have a view, they have a lens. But what it does is it helps them hold a space, another thinking space for that person, by having some more open-ended, productive questions, rather than how do you think you went this year? That's such a loaded question, and it's got so many closed, unhelpful answers to it. Rather than say, so what have been the highlights this year? What's gone well this year? Thinking about that class and those students, tell me just one small standout, and you get them thinking about those things in advance. And then when you come to the conversation, you're taking a strengths-based approach, whereas traditionally review and development courses have taken conversations have had, in the corporate world as well, a very deficit-based tone to them. You're basically getting a grade. And sometimes your pay grade is attached to it as well in the corporate world, sometimes in education. So it's really coming from that. This is an opportunity to talk about what's gone well first, to look at strengths and resources. And I would hope that the teacher comes in and bounces in the door and says, wait till I tell you what I've been doing with Alyssa this year. I've had such a good coaching cycle. I've not quite got there in my goals yet, but I want to share some data that I've seen. And they're actually working with a coach and gathering data and professional learning information that they take to those conversations. When I talk to principals about this, that's the kind of conversation they want to see. But what we need them to learn is, in order to run that well, you need to have some coaching skills in your repertoire as a leader. And your middle leaders, your faculty heads, year level head, those kind of people who manage teams, they need coaching skills. They're not being coaches. They're not of the depth of training that you have and expertise you have. And actually, they don't need to have an instructional voice in it either. They're just there to help that person do their deepest reflection and then set meaningful goals. The other expertise is goal setting. What we see in those review and development conversations is people then write down their goals, and you probably see some of them as a coach.
Oh, yeah.
And you think that's not a very coachable goal. They write down things like, I want to learn more about using technology in my classroom, or I want to learn more about da da da. And actually, as a coach, you'd probably be coming back and saying to them, and what will that get you? And what will that do for the students? And what will you be seeing in the students if, and you're starting to articulate a coachable goal that they might strive for, whereas goal striving behavior isn't really generated and it's not very motivating or emotionally compelling when you've just written, I'm going to do X this year. And X is just a teacher practice, or it's a broad fuzzy area of curriculum or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes the managers running those conversations don't have the coaching skills to understand what an emotionally compelling goal looks like, that person's really going to be excited and bouncing out the office with. You want them jumping up at their seat and saying, great, I'm set up, let me go. Where's Alyssa? I need to get her to go on a coaching cycle with me on this. And they're pulling the coaches to them as a resource.
Yeah.
You know? That's an example of where those leaders in that review and development, which is traditionally very formal and structured and quite sterile, could take a coaching approach. If they just ask slightly different questions, if they listened for different things, if they suspended judgment just for a bit longer, even though it's part of their territory because they're leaders and managers, they're probably going to get much more out of that person in terms of motivation. And yet these processes are supposed to motivate and challenge people, but they don't. They tend to actually demotivate people, and they just go, oh, we need to do it. Just tick up. How quickly can I get out of Alyssa's office here? I just tell her what she wants to hear and go. Can we go now?
Mm-hmm.
There's an opportunity there for a coaching approach. Yeah. If I give you one more example, an extreme end is the corridor conversations. So that's completely informal.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wandering down the corridor and you're a coach or you're a teacher. And let's say I was the principal and you're kind of under my direction to some extent as an instructional coach in the building. And you fall into line with me and you say, have you got a minute, Chris? Or you come to my office and you say, or you sit down with me in the staff room. If as a principal, I get time to go to the staff room or whatever. Anyway, I go there and you sit down and you say, have you got a minute? You know, those got a minute conversations. Mm-hmm. And what do? You start talking at me before I actually say yes or no, don't you? They just start offloading onto you. How in that moment do I respond in a coach-like way? So one of the things I would say to you straight away, Alyssa, is I'd look at my watch, and that's not rude, it's respectful. I'd say, actually, I've got 10 minutes I've got to be in a meeting with a parent. But actually, I've got about 5 minutes just now. Is that long enough? Because I'll need to get ready and get there. Is that long enough to talk through what we want to talk about? What would be helpful to you in the 5 minutes we've got? Do you want to keep walking or do you want to go into my office? What I've just done is what you would probably do in contracting in a formal coaching conversation. You'd say, we're going to have 6 sessions. We're going to meet at these times. I might do this occasionally. I might gather feedback for you. You clarify all the parameters of the engagement. In that 10 seconds interaction there, I've just clarified very honestly, I've got 5 minutes. I can help you think for 5 minutes. What would be helpful to think through? If we need longer, we can make another time to talk. I'd really like to hear what you've got to say. Mm-hmm. That's actually me building trust with you right there in that moment. Rather than what most of us do is we just go, yeah. And we're in our head, we're thinking, I've got a meeting in 5 minutes. What am I going to be doing? I'm not really giving you my attention. What it's making me do is say, I'm going to give Alyssa my attention for 5 minutes. Yep. And she knows that when 5 minutes is up, I'm going to be going, let's get to some actions. What should we do next? And I'm off to my meeting and she's off with some clarity. That's what I'm trying to do in that 5 minutes. Now, clearly, that's not going to look like one of your half an hour coaching sessions with one of your teachers. You can't.
It shows value. Like, it shows that you value me as the teacher who came in and had this concern and wanted to talk. Yeah. You're giving me this space. You're asking me what's the most important thing. And then you're giving me that option. Like, I mean, even you just saying this and giving me an anecdote, it still made me feel valued, because I was like, oh, you even followed it up with, I really value what you have to say and care about you. And that strengthens the relationship.
And it doesn't take much to do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we have leaders come and learning about coaching, there was one thing one participant said to me years ago when we do the what do you want, what would be a great takeaway from this course, right at the start of the course, to say, what is it you hope to walk away with? And this person, who was a school principal, said to me, I want to have more efficient conversations, Chris. Efficient conversations. And I thought, oh, that sounds, and the way he said it was like, I've not got time for people. I need to move them on quick. That's what I heard. I need to move them on quickly. And then he saw me do a quick coaching demo, like one of those 5-10 minute ones. And in the debrief, he said, that's it. That's it. He said, I'm just giving people this space and they're just filling it because and he said, I'm finding myself standing in the corridor on my way to the car to go home at night. And because I'm so approachable, it's so many strengths. Because I'm so approachable, I will give them my time, even though I know I'm on my way home to see my family. And I'm still there half an hour later, not knowing where to go with this conversation and what they've left me with. And he said, what I need is some skills to help that move. And efficient was the right word for him, but to help me shape that conversation, to help me corral their thinking, to help me. And he was doing this kind of, and it wasn't he wanted to constrain them. He wasn't wanting to control them. It wasn't coming from that place. It was more, how can I be of more service to them quicker, because time is precious. It's the most precious commodity in a school. How can I do that more effectively and efficiently? And so what we then go to are some little frames. So that tiny little anecdote with you there, I started with a question, didn't I? I said, what would you like to think about? What would be helpful in this 5 minutes? Or what would you like to think about? Which is really me saying, you're going to be thinking about something here. I didn't say, how can I help you?
Yeah.
Because what I might get then is, I just need you to do this, this, and this for me. And can you tell me this and tell me that? And it might be a technical thing and they just need an answer. If it is, then that's easy. But most of the time it's they want to think something through with you. And so your attitudinal thing is, they've got this. They've got the resources they need in them or around them. I might be one of them, but not necessarily. Straight away, I'm not going to fixer mode, because the first thing you tend to do when you think of efficiency is, I'll just tell them, because that'll be quicker and easier. But then they'll be back the next time for the same thing, and it's dependency. So there's 3 questions that might help here, Alyssa, then there's lots of frameworks around this. Some of your coaching questions, you use standard coaching questions help. But one of the things that helps us, and this is John Campbell and Christian Van Uurberg's writing, is as I'm listening to you in that moment, I'm asking myself, what's wanted? So I'm listening for what's wanted. That's the first question. What's wanted here? And you might be telling me about everything that's wrong. This isn't working and that isn't working and I've just got no time and this is a disaster. And in between, I'm listening for what's wanted instead. My next direction is what's working? What's working now? What is in place? I've got this, I've got that, I've tried this, I've tried. Okay, so you've tried that. So tell me about that. Or so, when's a time when it's gone better? When's there been a time when that class has been more engaged? I'm looking for what's working. And then the third question is, what's next? What's wanted, what's working, what's next? And as a little framework in my head, and it's, again, John and Christian kind of developed that. In amongst that, I've got paraphrasing, I've got clarifying, I've got, okay, so it sounds like this, Alyssa. It sounds like what you want is that. Even though you've just been telling me what you don't want, it sounds like you want, and I'll flip it and tell you the opposite.
Yeah.
And say, so it sounds like you want, just a bit more headspace. It's a bit frazzled. I will do some empathizing. Wow, that sounds like that was a frustrating morning you've had. And you go, yeah, that was, thanks. I don't then say, oh, tell me more about how frustrated you are and whose fault's that. I say, so how would you, if we could move this forward, how will you be feeling? So I'm asking solution-focused reframing questions, but doing that really quickly in the moment is helping that person think differently about the challenge. It's not denying the challenge is there. It's not Pollyanna. It's not saying just think positive, Alyssa, it'll all be better. They're there. I'm saying, I see you. I see your struggle. I can see what's on your mind. Is this what we want instead? Okay, so what's working now that's getting you towards that? And then what's a tiny step you can take before we check in at the end of the day or next week? Let's check in and see how you went with that. And I'm kind of doing what you do when you set next steps with a teacher in formal coaching. But I'm doing it in the moment and it's supporting their thinking, and it's helping them feel that they're making progress towards something. I've not solved the problem in 5 minutes in the corridor, but I've helped them feel some degree of control over it and a way forward, pathways thinking, and they've got some agency now because they've said, I can go and do this. And it
Yeah.
might be I can go and talk to John, or I can go and talk to down the corridor, or I'll go and set up that meeting. Actually, I need to go and sit and reflect and do a bit more planning, and then we'll check in and see how we went. They've got a way forward, a first tiny step towards progress. And you can do that intentionally in those brief interactions. And so what John and I are writing about is what are the techniques and strategies that help you do that when those opportunities present. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and as you gave, going back to your very first example, and even to then talking about in the corridor, I keep thinking about the impact cycle and that very first step of getting a clear picture of reality.
Reality. Yeah.
And that clarity, as their conversational partner, you're helping them gain clarity.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that is often rushed. And how can we not feel awkward and take the time to allow space for clarity, whether it is clarity of what's already going well. Like,
Yeah.
I love how you started, you asked that question instead of saying, what's going bad, just, or, how are you doing?
No.
What's going well? And that helps them reflect on clarity and reality in their classroom.
Definitely. And people will go there whether you ask that question or not. Most of us default to the negative.
Yes.
So they'll tell you about their version of reality. They will tell you about that straight away. So before you've even said yes or no, I've got a minute, they'll start and you're just listening. You might even still be sitting at your desk finishing an email to someone and they've already started talking before they waited for your answer. Oh, I just need to talk to you. And that's one of the things that comes with the leadership territory, isn't it? Which is why we're saying you're not coaching, but you're taking a coaching approach. You're bringing some of the skills and techniques and that way of being around being curious, being respectful, being humble, setting aside your own knowledge and expertise until it's needed. That's an attitudinal thing, but then you're using some of those key questions, key clarifying techniques. So what you want is da 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 da, and they'll go, yeah, that's what I want, or they'll go, nah, it's not that, it's this. In that split second, it only took 10 seconds to say that back and forth. You've got them more clarity than they had 10 seconds ago. So, but to do that in a really intentional, routine way that it becomes just how you lead conversations takes time. And we know that it needs a depth of understanding to start with of how to coach formally. You're better equipped as a formal designated instructional coach to do that as a leader than a leader coming in just dabbling. Sometimes a little bit of knowledge is dangerous, isn't it? So they'll just start firing questions at people randomly, and they'll annoy everyone with the what else question, because they just overuse it, all that stuff. So there's a danger here that, and it's the last thing I would say about that in the corridor is you've got this insight, or anyone listening to this, to go, I'm going to go and try that tomorrow. And so you meet me in the corridor again, Alyssa, and you say, so Chris, I've got this in my mind. And normally what you would have got from me is fixer. And all of a sudden, I'm asking you these questions, and you go, oh, this is different. This feels awkward. What's Chris doing? You might even look at me strangely and go, you don't normally ask me questions. You usually just give me, and you might be quite dissatisfied by that. You might say, hang on, it usually helps me. You've not been very helpful here. And what actually is the best thing to do in that scenario is to say, now, I could jump to advice here. Can I ask you a couple of questions that might help? I actually make it really explicit that I'm trying to show up differently for you.
Yes.
One of the worst things you can do is try and do it by stealth. Stealth coaching is not a healthy thing to do, because people walk away feeling like something's been done to them. And
Happened.
we know what that feels like. And you walk away going, what happened there? I feel manipulated. I feel dirty. What's going on? Something's not right here. So it's actually better just to be really honest and upfront as a leader and say, look, this question might help. And that's me showing that I'm being really intentional in trying to service your thinking and your progress. And if it doesn't work, you go, that didn't work. Let's try this. Let's try a scaling question. So that's a 10. Where are you now in relation to that? What would a 5 look like if you're a 4 just now? So you're really explicitly and transparently using coaching techniques to help that person think.
Yeah.
And acknowledging when it works and acknowledging when it doesn't work. There's a lot in there. Yeah.
So I do have a question along that. Someone who's just getting out, they're wanting to strengthen their conversational leadership.
Mm.
As like a kind of just a closing question here, if I'm starting out, how do I know if my conversation went well?
Mm.
What are some key indicators besides the obvious of someone just saying, "Oh, that was so good. Thank you so much."
Yeah. And sometimes people will say, I ask for feedback. And I say, how do you ask for the feedback? And they'll say, well, I just say, how was that? No one's ever going to come back to you, and they're all too polite. They're not going to say, well, that was rubbish, Alyssa. I'm more confused than I was 10 minutes ago. Thanks very much, but I won't ask you next time. Nobody will ever say that to you.
Mhm.
They'll all go, oh, yeah, it was good, thanks. And that's not useful feedback to you. So, one of the questions I often use is, so what's become clearer in this conversation, Alyssa? Before we go, I actually let you have the last word. That's actually getting me feedback as well. Because if I say what's become clearer and you come back to me and say nothing, I'm more confused, well, that's pretty good feedback for me. Most of the time they'll say, oh, well, I can see there's a way forward now. Actually asking them and asking yourself, what will be the first small signs of progress? So if someone's really stuck, use solution-focused language. Go for what will be the first tiny signs. Use that word deliberately. And it's easier for people to think of tiny signs of progress rather than, so what will it look like when we hit the goal? If the goal's a really tough goal and it's a long way away, to ask them what success will look like in detail is actually quite a challenging thing. To ask what would signs of progress look like is actually a helpful solution-focused way of thinking. And what would that look like? And so what would they notice? What would you notice? So I'm actually going to flip that on you, Alyssa, that question you asked me, because I've dodged the answer, haven't I? What we need to ask ourselves, if these conversations are more successful, or if I'm being a more successful conversation leader or leader of conversations in different contexts, what will I be noticing in myself? And what will I be noticing, more importantly, in the other person? So I'll notice them pause more, I would suggest. I'll notice them think more. And I might say to you, what does thinking look like? That's invisible. Oh, no, it's not. Thinking looks like, thinking sounds like, oh, that's a tough question, Alyssa. Great. I've got you thinking. Thinking looks like silence, puzzlement, that kind of, what will I notice? I'll notice them sense making. What does that look like? I'll notice them kind of go, oh, it's this, it's that. I'll notice light bulb moments. I'll literally see that little zzz, bing.
Yes.
I'll notice more aha moments in them. What will that look like? So I think that's the best way for us to think about this. I could give you a list of what I might see, but that would change in different conversations, But that more of, less of is a useful way of thinking about it. There'll be more silences. There'll be way less of me in the conversation. And I'll be asking, if I'm doing it effectively, I'll be asking one question at a time and letting it land. There's a very simple thing. When we are trying to do this, when you were learning to be a coach, you tend to conjoin questions, don't you? You make it up as it comes out your mouth. So what you tend to do is keep rephrasing it as you say it and just confuse the person. And they say, should I answer your last question or your first version of the question? So ask one question and let it land and see what happens. And then the other thing is, can I summarize effectively? I think that's another key skill.
Yeah.
Is especially in the moment, can I say things like, so it sounds like what you want is ba-bum. It seems like it's about this. And I propose a word that you might have used or I've paraphrased. That's one key skill that really helps get momentum going quickly in those in the moment conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My computer's about to die, but I'm plugging it in
That's
right.
all right.
Oh,
it's
it's my fault.
our cue to wrap up soon anyway.
No, and that as you were saying that, I think that is so powerful for someone who might just be starting off to really think, was there less of me in the conversation? Just starting there. And can I summarize effectively?
Yeah. What do they want? What's
Yeah.
wanted for them? For them, what's wanted, and what's that first step towards it? And even that provisional language towards it, not to solve it. Because most of these things are not quick fixes. If they are, you just tell them. If there's a right way to do something, you just tell them. You don't ask them coaching questions. You know, you come to me and say, look, I've forgotten how to log into the assessment system, Chris. I know we did the PD on it last week. Can you remind me just this one last time? And you're looking at me thinking, really, Chris, this is the fourth time you've asked me about this. Okay, we might need to do some coaching on getting this sticking. But right now, I don't need you to say to me, so Chris, when you've done this before, what's worked with you? What options have you got to do it?
Yeah.
Alyssa, you know how to log in. Can you just tell me how to do it? You're my option right now. Oh, I don't know. I'm a coach, so I'm not supposed to give you advice. I'll ask you clever questions to make you dream up what's in my head. Just tell me, you know. So sometimes there will be an answer. There'll be a policy, there'll be a practice, there'll be a right way. But if it's not sticking for that person and they keep repeatedly asking you for that prop, then maybe there should be a coaching conversation, maybe with a coach, on how to make that stick in their practice. But most of the time, they just need a space to think and find their way forward. And that's what you're trying to do in those less formal scenarios, that aren't formal coaching.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much. Like, I just feel like this message can make such a difference in the world, and not just for our leaders to strengthen their conversational skills, but for our educators to feel valued. And this, what you are teaching and coaching, and the message that you and growth coaching is putting out into the world is adding that relationship piece that I think has been missing for so long.
Thank you. That's wonderful feedback. There's one phrase I want to leave you with, if I may, and I know I keep adding things.
Please
The
do.
book, one of the pieces of advice we got, or lovely feedback we got from the editor who's looking at our draft manuscript for the book just now, and it was a paraphrase of what you've just said. He said, these sound like humanizing conversations. And we both went, wow, we'll take that. I think we'll use that in one of the testimonials for the that comes out. That if that's the way what we've written so far comes across, then yep, that's absolutely what we're about. That's how we want to be treating our fellow educators. Humanizing conversations. Yeah. You know what the opposite of that feels like. Yeah.
We need more of that in our world.
Definitely. Yeah.
Oh, Chris. So before we close up, tell our audience, where can people find you?
Okay, so I think you could probably put notes about where I am on social media and so on, but Growth Coaching International's website, growthcoaching.com.au. It's an Australian company. We've got a resource page there that's packed full of free resources, articles, this kind of stuff. If you want our training work, then we work in partnership with Instructional Coaching Groups. So if you're in North America listening to this, you can go to ICG and access our training programs in North America there or online. Contact details and things will be there as well. And actually, I've nearly forgot to mention, I'm coming to the TLC conference, the Teaching, Learning, Coaching conference in New Orleans in October. Again, I'm lucky to come again. I didn't go to Florida last year. I'm presenting there. So if you're in North America, not it's your bulk audience, and you want to come and say hello and have a chat in person, then I'll be in New Orleans in October.
Oh, that's amazing. And all of this is also in the show notes. Followers, so I want to go down to the show notes and follow Chris, follow everyone who he follows, because let me tell you, a wealth of information and knowledge.
Great.
So
thank you. Thank you so much, Alyssa. It's been a joy. Great.
It's been a joy.
Thanks.